the more you focus on longevity, the more you realize that time is more valuable than money. There's hundreds of genes that directly or indirectly affect inflammation.
Dr. Sam Shay solves health puzzles for busy, health-conscious entrepreneurs, biohackers, and longevity enthusiasts so that they can have a long and meaningful life. His journey has led him to specialize in functional lab and genetics analysis in his virtual coaching practice.
What genetics will do is say, this is how you need to ideally live and eat, and there's even specific nutrients that are ideal for certain people that are just permanent fixtures that they need in their diet. Like, can you imagine how powerful that knowledge is literally for the rest of my life? But there's basically 4 categories of functional tests. There's
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms. Hi, welcome to the next talk on the Uncovering the Secrets of Longevity, Live Beyond the Norms Health Summit. I'm excited with our next speaker. This is Dr. Sam Shay. Let me give you a brief introduction and we can hop right into this. We already had a great kind of riff going before we even hopped on here. But Dr. Sam Shay solves health puzzles for busy, health-conscious entrepreneurs, biohackers, and longevity enthusiasts. By the way, that's me and everyone listening, so that they can have a long and meaningful life. His journey has led him to specialize in functional lab and genetics analysis in his virtual coaching practice. He is also a stand-up comic, which is why we were riffing. And welcome to, thank you for speaking and welcome to the Health Summit.
Thanks, Chris. I'm really happy to be here. I love being on summits and educating on some real data-based solutions for people when it comes to longevity. I think there's a lot of what I call bell curve biochemistry, where people are just, hey, look, we show this in the science that this thing is helpful for you. It's like, that's great. That's bell curve population-based analysis. What about bespoke biochemistry, where we actually look at what you need individually? And this is what the lab testing is so critical for.
And so that goes back to like, we are each an N of one, right? Like we're the individual, and how do we address that?
We are an N of one, but we are nested within population norms. And so so going based, it's more like stages. If people are just starting out with longevity, like get off all the junk food, do all the good stuff you should do. That's generic, helpful, holistic advice. Then the next stage is like, okay, well, what nutrients do I need to do? Well, I hear that this thing is good and this thing is good. And, maybe it's CoQ10, maybe it's MCT oil, maybe it's goji berry juice I snort up my nose. I don't know. Like it's whatever, comedy folks, whatever is kind of recommended kind of in the zeitgeist as a general bell curve biochemistry. But then the next layer for people is to go into actual individual lab testing, because you're not like a bell curve. You're a series of hundreds and thousands of different bell curves, and you are in different places on each of those bell curves relative to the norm. So it's a matter of staging, so people can graduate up to see wherever they're at. Then when they should do individual functional testing is when they're wanting to get something way more individualized than just going according to whatever the bell curves say.
Yeah. Okay. So that concept, bell curve concept, I love that. We're somewhere on the bell curve, but we are not the bell curve. All right. Sure. So you've jumped in. We're already off to a great start. Tell us a little bit about your journey, because it was in your bio. I wanted to actually hear it directly from you. Like, what led you to this point today?
Sure. And for the visually minded here, I do have a presentation for people. People who aren't watching you'll be able to get all of this because I'll be talking through it. But what I'll say is that the presentation will be very useful. And I'm seeing that it
has not loaded.
It's not loading.
Yet.
Let me I think I know what happened here. Let me just. Do we have any technical glitch music? We can do.
By the way, the goji berry is one of the worst ones to get stuck in your nose. I don't.
Oh my God! It's it's super uncomfortable. And did you know goji berry juice is actually a nightshade?
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's actually a nightshade. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Wow.
Um, so what we have here, I'll just minimize that here. All right. So the way I got into this is I had a pretty unhealthy childhood. I was raised by a stressed out, unhealthy, tired mompreneur. Dad was symbolically there with child support. And I developed severe problems: insomnia, gut issues, crippling fatigue, sugar addiction, video game addiction, lots of joint pain and spinal pain from a lot of violence at school, and was gaslit and ignored and isolated and all sorts of unpleasant things. And I decided as a teenager that I had to either take control of my health or take myself out. And I decided to take control of my health. I know it's a bit grim way to start, but it's reality. And the next, I then decided to help others come out of their struggles. And the reality is that when helping people with chronic issues, it's actually the very similar to helping people who want to do longevity. And it's you just have to have an analytical system in order to figure out what's going on. So it may sound like we're talking about longevity, and I'm kind of going backwards into struggling with chronic issues. And the reason I bring this up is that whenever you're looking at longevity, have a map, have a system to analyze all the different facets of your life. I came up with the 10 pillars of health. And it's 10 pillars. This is not a 10 pillars talk. That's too much to cram into this to the time frame we have. I've got ebooks on it. I've got other videos on it. And the thing is that if you're going to look at longevity, work with a framework. It can be the 10 pillars of health. It could be the triangle of wellness. It can be the inverted hypotenuse of well-being. I don't care. It can be something that's just have a framework in which you can view all different aspects of your life. Most people get fixated on like diet, but to the exclusion of stress, or to the exclusion of exercise, or to the exclusion of sleep hygiene, or they focus on one of the others or one of the others, or they focus on 1 to 5 of them, but exclude the other 5 because they either don't know or they don't know enough. We'll just get to it eventually. But the reality is that health is kind of a team sport, and there's many different facets. I derive 10 from detailed health analysis of chronically unwell clients and patients. And I found that these 10 are universal amongst anyone, whether their goals are to get out of chronic issues, maintain where they're at, or to achieve longevity, life extension, be a biohacker, whatever the jargon is for aspirational health enthusiasts. So have a system. In brief, mine is looking at the brain and hormones, bowel and digestion, the physical body, old injuries, genetics. I put genetics in body because literally twins have the same body because they have the same genetics. BURST stands for burst, exercise, and movement. Biotoxins and inflammation. The 6th pillar is bionutrients and diet. The 7th pillar is breakfast and routines. The 8th pillar is bothers and hidden infections. The 9th pillar is bothers and stressors. The 9th pillar is bugs and hidden infections and mold. The 10th pillar is bedtime and sleep. So 10 pillars. 10 is enough for people to grasp and wrap their head around. I saw some guy had 37. I was like, good luck teaching that, bro. Like that, no, that's not going to happen. And 3 is too simplistic, you know? And then, and we're not going to linger on this slide because this slide will take 20 minutes to explain. For people who have the recordings, you can study this slide, but this is how all chronic illness and burnout happen. And it's also how to understand how longevity can be reinforced. So people can have bad lifestyle decisions or circumstances that they can't control, which creates an adaptation response interpreted by your genes. In order, you will have one of the 4 or more, one of the 4 combination of the 4 major adaptive responses. You have an inflammatory response, your blood sugar goes wonky, or your free radical damage, or your tissues break down. And then if you have chronic adaptation, then you'll have damage to one or more of the 3 main body systems, like your hormones, your gut, or your liver detox. Yes, there are other systems, but these are the 3 big ones. And then if you have continued breakdown, again, influenced by your genetics as to how they're going to break down, you're going to get symptoms. And then symptoms can be weight gain, fatigue, low mood, indigestion, cravings, insomnia, whatever it might be. But then symptoms lead to coping, which then leads to bad lifestyle choices, which then leads to more adaptation, more damage, more symptoms, more coping, more adaptive, and round and round and round it goes. So if you, at the source, you work on the lifestyle, then the arrows that connect these different corners are your genetics that you create. If you know your genetics, you can create systems or blockades to prevent things from progressing, because genetics tells you this is how you should ideally live, and also what genetic fault lines you've inherited that you need to shore up, because they will manifest if you don't shore them up. And then the functional testing is to learn how your body is adapting, what organ systems have been damaged, and then create a customized nutrition plan that accounts for functional, genetics, and lifestyle. So that's like the entirety of the system to understand how to think about not just burnout and spiraling down, but also how to spiral up and to aim at longevity.
So that's really a great intro, right? So it's from an unhealthy position, right? Mm-hmm. Throw in analytical mind, which you clearly have, and then come out on the other end with a systemized approach to really to health. And then health is like, what's the point of having longevity if there is no health? And you kind of set me up for this next question. What are the most important genetic tests that you would recommend for health and for longevity?
So for genetics, so before we talk about testing, I think what I want to do is cover kind of the two biggest objections to testing, which is time and money. And it's a matter of, and to understand why it's beneficial to invest, keyword invest, into testing is about the long term. Upfront, there is an investment financially. Like you got a testing, analysis, etc., coaching. But in the long term, you will save tons of money because you'll actually be focusing on what you need to do, not what the latest, podcast, magazine, television show, or magazine insert informed you. You'll learn what you need to do to actually absorb the nutrients you're taking the time to do. You actually learn what actual diet you need to do, which we'll get to your question on genetics in a second. You can look at what you actually, it prevents you from doing what I call holistic ADD, where you're just like, oh, I'll try this, and 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 it just becomes like this ongoing ADD. And you're not actually digging one place deep for a well of longevity. That's a kind of a weird metaphor. I guess the fountain of youth. I guess that works. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You're digging hundreds of little shallow things. You're not digging deep to get that one wellspring of. I need to stop that metaphor. We're moving on.
I like it. That's we'll call it the fountain of longevity.
Fountain of longevity. TM. Okay. Right. The other thing is that it'll save time because you'll actually know what you need to do in order of priority. And the more you focus on longevity, the more you realize that time is more valuable than money. And that investing in testing ultimately saves you not just money long term, but tons of time. In fact, adds time. So that's the reason to invest in testing. When you're asking me about genetics testing, there's several different types of genetics tests that are out there. And I'd say that there's lots of different genetics companies, and each of them thinks that their telomeres are longer, and that glad you took a second. Thank you. All right. The way to think about genetics is not necessarily what percentage Irish you are. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what are health genetics. And there's a specific mindset around genetics. So there's the Western approach to genetics, which is very much analogous to germ theory, where it's one gene causes one problem. And whereas, when we look at Boucamp as opposed to Pasteur, Boucamp said, no, it's the environment, not the bug. And that it's if you throw seeds onto pavement, nothing's going to sprout, but if you throw them to fertile soil, then things will happen. It's the same thing in functional genetics, that we're looking at clusters of genes, function and behavior, and we're not looking at the disease genes. We're looking at the drivers of disease. There's the disease genes are down here. These so-called heart disease genes and Alzheimer's genes, stroke genes, diabetes genes, whatever, pick your disease. But then there's the drivers of diseases that are superordinate or above, that if those are provoked for a long enough and significant amount of significant intensity over a long enough period of time, then those will poke on the quote unquote disease genes. So the drivers of diseases, what I'm talking about, are inflammation, free radical scavenging, particularly in the mitochondria. And I know I'm throwing out a lot of jargon here, so for people that are unclear about these terms, don't worry, just keep listening to Summits, because look, if you're going to talk about longevity, I'm guessing you have a mitochondria nerd on here at some point.
Yep.
Like, I'm guessing. So like just hang with the jargon. You'll at the worst, you'll be better at winning Scrabble games if you listen to these Summits. So you need to have, the most important is to look for the inflammatory genes and the free radical scavenging genes, particularly in the mitochondria. You look at the main liver detox genes for phase 1, phase 2. You look at the vitamin D receptor genes, which I personally believe are two of the most important genes as it relates to health of all time. You look at methylation genes, and not just MTHFR. There's like over a dozen key methylation genes that are important. And by the way, a key error that people make with fixating on methylation is that methylation is subordinate to inflammation. That it's actually better that if you work on the inflammatory stuff first, a lot of the methylation issues downstream can be meaningfully improved without having to fixate on methylation. Then there's the cardiovascular circulation genes, like can you circulate the nutrients and the integrity of your blood vessels in order to deliver nutrients and remove toxins. And then there's the fat and energy metabolism genes, like can you actually process energy properly? So if you look at those 7 drivers, inflammation, free radical scavenging, liver detox, vitamin D utilization, methylation, cardiovascular circulation, and fat energy metabolism. Those are the 7 drivers. That's the top layer of genetic analysis that people should really focus on before fixating on individual disease genes. So I'm not against people going after the quote unquote individual disease genes, but it's like look above it and see what's triggering it, what's in the lifestyle that's causing issues. And the good news about functional genetics is that you are inherently involved in epigenetics, which means it's how your expression of the genes can vary based on lifestyle input. You see this picture I designed of a traffic light of green, yellow, red with the cone, with the beams kind of overlapping each other. So if someone has a red dot, or if you're wanting to win that Scrabble tournament I alluded to as homozygous variant, the red dot, that's like you were born, with genes that are not adaptive to today's environment. So you're starting further back from the starting line. But the good news is with proper lifestyle, diet, nutrition, and so on, that's implemented consistently over time, your red dot genes can behave green-like. They will never be green. That will never happen. But they can behave green-like. And the reverse is also true. If you were born with the wild type genes, the so-called good version of that genes, you start ahead of the curve. And if you really work hard at screwing this up, you will act as if you have a red-like gene, even though you were born at a base with a green-like gene. So this is why in the prior slide I said that we're coming from hope and optimism with functional genetics, because you have the tools to empower yourself to influence the outcomes of your genes that you cannot change, but you can change their expression, as opposed to feelings of helplessness and pessimism. Oh, you got that specific disease gene, you're screwed. So it's a different mindset around genetics if you understand the big picture around genetics. And I will say that there's some specific other criteria to look at as well. You've got, you want to look at the genes that are higher up, meaning the ones that are, like I mentioned before, those 7 drivers. And you want to look at the genes that are upstream, like they're the generals that control, like there's hundreds of genes that directly or indirectly affect inflammation. I want to look at the top dozen, a dozen and a half that are just coordinating the whole thing. Like those are what I'm looking at. If I'm looking at free radical damage scavenging in the mitochondria, I'm picking the top 3: MN-SOD, glutathione peroxidase, catalase. Those 3, done. If I'm looking at vitamin D metabolism, I want to look at VDR1 and VDR2. Those are the top ones. There are others for sure. There's even VDR3, but like I really want to look at the most important ones that then control and influence the ones underneath them. And then I want to look at the genes that have a variation, at least 10% of the population. Because if I'm going to be doing gene testing, I don't want to test for something that only 0.00001% of someone may have a variation, because that gene's so critical, you're basically going to be dead or half dead if you have that variation. So that may be super important to some individuals. I have a dear colleague who has a very rare mitochondrial anomalies, people who have Huntington's disease, whatever it is, like that super obscure gene variation is very important to them, but that's a very rare case. And I'm not excluding those genetics tests, but that is downstream from the upstream stuff that I'm talking about. So I'm including those, but I'm putting them kind of over here as a next step. And then the other critical thing about looking at genes is, do the genes you're looking at have peer-reviewed research done in top journals on humans, not wombats or nematodes, that show that specific lifestyle changes genuinely affect the expression of that gene to make it behave more green-like. So, because you have a lot of, I mean, you used to have like 23andMe and Ancestry would just spit out hundreds and hundreds of genes, but like you can dig into the research and it's like, how many of these are actually done on humans? What's the quality of the journal? And like, are they actually giving recommendations that are empowering or just terrifying?
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
Well, yeah. So I think it's interesting, kind of your comparison of methylation and inflammation, because that's gonna. I'll save a question for a little bit later about kind of age testing. But one of the things I knew you would have a number because of your analytical nature. So you've got these 7 drivers. You've got 2 things that are probably playing right into each other, which is great. You want to look at the key ones, but the key ones are driven by the actual research. Like there's no reason to, I've always believed this, I learned this in engineering school. If the answer to the question doesn't change what you do, don't waste your time asking the question. Right. So if you're looking at genes and you're saying, well, I'm going to look at these because I know they're kind of related to inflammation, but there's no studies that say I can impact it one way or the other, then I'm going to stop looking at those genes. Like those, they just make no sense to even look at. And then,
you know who taught me about that? PhD engineer who switched his career to genetics.
Oh, wow.
Everything I'm describing came from an engineer's mind. So
yeah.
we're in the same ballpark here.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. And what you're saying is, and I think this would fit into your category, right? So certainly APOE4, Chris Hemsworth in the I think it's a Disney special kind of came out that's related to Alzheimer's. You're not against those tests, but that's not the first layer of tests, because that puts you you're looking for a needle in a haystack versus like, let's look at the haystack and figure out, are you an orange haystack, or are you, in your case, are you a red, yellow, or green haystack? And that can determine, steps that we might take for more longevity.
Yeah, I'll even show you, like, an example of the 15 main inflammatory genes. Like, so just here's a cardiac example. You want to look the functional side of things. We're looking at clusters. And so if I'm looking at clusters of genes here, and I show this to people in the lay public, like who's in trouble cardiovascularly? The person on the left with a bunch of green dots, or the person on the right with a bunch of red and yellows? It's obviously the person on the right. But if I'm fixating on a singular gene, I'm looking at one tree and missing the forest.
Yeah.
So the person who really needs to look at their cardiovascular health is here. Now, the good news is that inflammation is superordinate to cardiovascular. So one of the primary things we look at first is inflammation, then the free radicals and the VDRs and the liver detox. Even methylation is superordinate to this. The blood circulation genes are after that. And to your point on the ApoE4, that's not even in the top 15 genes that are most important. Here's the list of them. Interleukin 1s, there's 3 of them. Interleukin 6, interleukin 8, interleukin 18, TNF alpha, 3 CRP genes, 2 COX genes, and the 3 interleukin 10s, which are about extinguishing inflammation. So you're looking at 3 clusters of inflammation: initiation, sustaining, and clearing. And people can have different clusters even within those 15 genes that I look for. The most consequential ones is that if the interleukin 10s have variants, because if you have a small little campfire and you can't put it out, you're going to have problems. And the things that when I evaluate, I have people concepts, oh, what do you think of this gene test and this gene test? I just go straight to their inflammatory profile. And if they don't have the interleukin 10s, I stop looking. Like, we're done. I'm not even bothering with this. Like you cannot take any inflammatory profile seriously if you do not have the interleukin 10s in there. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, there's some people that are going to be like, well, what about this? Well, this is like, yeah, fine, but these are the 15 as I understand them, and so far I haven't seen anything to contradict it. So there's a quick way to test, like, what gene test should you do and should you not do. I think everyone should start with like the big umbrella genetics, and then if they need to, go to the super niche ones. And then it's like, how do you know which ones not to do? Well, if they don't have the interleukin 10s, if they don't look at VDR, if they don't look at MNSA, GPX, and catalase, then if they don't look at interleukin 6 and TNF alpha, if they don't have those are kind of like the top 10 or so that I look for. And there's plenty others, but those are like the top 10 if I'm going to actually evaluate the quality of a gene test for the purposes of longevity. So for the purposes of longevity, I would be looking at those approximate 10 just as a first pass, easy view on what's potentially there. And then there's other genetics. There's another element of genetics that most people don't know about or talk about. It doesn't have to do with copy variant analysis. It's actually copy number analysis. So this is looking at the duplicates of a gene, not the variation of the gene. And this is specifically determined if someone is keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb. So there's a whole three-dimensionality to genetics that most people do not know about or even talk about. It's called copy variant analysis. I'm specifically talking here about the AMY1 gene. And the best analogy I could come up with is, imagine you have a medieval fort and you've got the Visigoths charging the gate and you've got some cannons to keep them at bay. But instead of it's not the fort, it's your it's your metabolism you're defending. Instead of Visigoths, it's carbohydrates charging the gates. Instead of cannons, it's enzymes. It's your genes that are spitting out these enzymes to take down these carb barbarians charging the gate. So if you have 2 cannons versus, say, 12, you're going to have a hard time mowing down those carbs. Now, the variation of the AMY1 gene is like, well, does this version of the cannon spit out 90 enzymes per minute or 95 or 100? That's way less important than the sheer number of cannons. I can have 3 90 bullet per minute cannons is way better than 100 bullet per minute cannon, because not all variations are horribly different. So variations also vary in terms of how different they vary. So, and it's not like every red dot is a catastrophic problem, compared to the green. Some are just genuinely minor, and AMY1 gene is one of those. So when people say, "Oh, I checked my AMY1 gene. It's green, yellow, red, so I know what I'm doing." No, you don't. The variation is actually trivial. It's the duplicates that matter. So, for example, I had a for me, like, I thought I was I had the most Portlandia Mediterranean diet ever, and like I knew the names of my farmers and their chickens. Like it's everything was organic, like local, all the rest of it. The quinoa was picked by left-handed monks on the last harvest, you name it. So all the things, and it was terrible for me. It wasn't working. And when I did my genetics, this is back in like 2016, so we're talking 7 years ago at the time of this recording. It turned out I had the second lowest carb tolerance possible.
Wow.
So I actually have the diet that's optimal for me is a paleo straddling keto diet. And so within 1 week of changing my diet to my actual carb tolerance, my digestive problems of about 20 years just went away, because I actually started eating
according to your profile,
with my genetics. Yeah, with my profile. Now, here's an interesting nuance to that. If people listening to this have ever uttered the sentence, "I've tried all the diets and none of them work," or at least they only work for a month or two, and then and I'm so confused and overwhelmed and frustrated, I might as well just do the Twinkie diet, and given the longevity of Twinkies, I'll live till the next ice age anyway. So it's so if you ever uttered the sentence, "No diet works to me, I've tried them all," here's what may be going on. There's the genetic layer of your optimal diet. Are you genetically predisposed to keto, Mediterranean, paleo, high carb, whatever? But then there's the therapeutic metabolic layer. So for example, if I am genetically keto or paleo, but I have a metabolic problem with fat digestion, whether it's a problem like gallbladder or my pancreatic lipase or fat absorption across the lymphatic system, or a problem with my carnitine shuttle delivering fat to the mitochondria, or a problem with the mitochondria itself burning fat, I may genetically prefer fat, but I can't metabolically process it. So if I eat fat, I'm going to be screwed over metabolically, even though it's genetically ideal for me. So this is what I call your ideal genetic diet is wrapped in metabolic barbed wire. So you may have to have a separate diet to defang the barbed wire first, while you deal with the gallbladder, pancreatic absorption, carnitine shuttle, mitochondria, whatever the deal is. You have to have a separate diet and separate protocol first to defang that barbed wire. Then you can go to your optimal genetic diet. The reverse is also true. I could be high carb genetically, and those people do exist. I know that may upset the paleo people listening to this, but I don't care. I just follow the science. Genetically, there are high carb people, just like they're genetically keto people and they're genetically Mediterranean people. So, one of you can throw bacon like shurikens, the other will throw kale chips at you like shurikens. Just stop fighting. Just follow the genetic. So you can be high carb, but if you have a candida infection and you eat high carbs, you're going to make that infection bloom and cause all sorts of problems. So it's the same concept. Your high carb genetic optimal diet is wrapped in metabolic barbed wire. In this case, it's candida. And so you need a separate diet, separate protocols, etc., to defang and get rid of that metabolic wire, and get rid of the candida. Then you can go to your genetic optimal for your diet once the metabolic barbed wire has been cleared. So I'm emphasizing this because people rightly put a lot of stake on genetics. They rightly do. And I'm telling you right now, up front, from doing genetics testing for 7 years, you can get the data on genetics, which is, by the way, the most cost-effective, high-yielding functional test you will ever do, because the results do not change, or the quality and fidelity does not decay over time. You can just amortize however much money you spend on genetics. Just give yourself 30 years to amortize that investment. It will never change, whereas functional tests do decay. Their quality decays over time because the result, after 6, 10, 12 months, you need to get retested. So some people like, "Oh my God, I got my genetics. I finally have the answers." Yes, you do. Asterisk, unless you've got a metabolic barbed wire wrapping your genetics. And so they can get their genetics, implement the things, and it not working, and they feel so defeated, and then they just throw out the entire concept of holistic diet and natural health and optimal well-being altogether because they're so frustrated, understandably.
Bring on
So
the Twinkies.
yeah, and they just go on the Twinkie diet and away they go, you know?
It's a shame that the preservatives and the Twinkies don't actually work to preserve our own longevity, because that would be a
The reality is there was a research article that came out. I can't remember the year, but it was within the past maybe 5 years that embalmers of dead bodies need to use fewer preservative embalming things because everyone's coming in pre-preserved.
Oh wow,
It's kind of gross.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So that's interesting, right? So you can be following what your genetic profile says that you should do, and you could have some other underlying functional challenges that prevent that from working. And so you have to deal that. And I assume there are functional tests that you tend to follow to make sure that those things are in alignment.
Yeah, so the main functional tests, and there's 4 main categories. And again, this is not a deep dive, but people can come back to these slides and study them. But there's basically 4 categories of functional tests. There's hormone testing, which is adrenal testing, sex hormone testing. Most commonly uses the Dutch test in the functional testing universe. There's other competitors out there, but usually it's the Dutch test. And thyroid testing. So it's adrenals, sex hormones, thyroid. And you want to understand your stress resilience and your ability to adapt to stress for longevity. That's adrenal testing. You want sex hormone testing, and I like the Dutch test. Again, there are other competitors out there, that's fine. But you want to know the whole metabolic pathway because there's like 7 types of estrogen, not just one. And there's a particular thing amongst male life extension, longevity enthusiasts, like, oh my God, I got to get all this testosterone. It's like, hold on. What if you have an overactive aromatase enzyme that hyperconverts testosterone into estrogen and you end up fatter and with man boobs? What about that? So maybe testosterone is not the thing you should just jump on because a podcast said so. Maybe you should get testing first and see, do you actually have low testosterone or do you have normal? This is happening to me all the time. I see the test. Normal testosterone, but relatively high estrogen, which creates the same apparent appearance of low testosterone, but it's not actually low. It's relatively low to the estrogen. So the answer is not testosterone. It's fixing that aromatase enzyme so it's not hyper-converting testosterone to estrogen and detoxing the estrogen and changing the lifestyle that would have created the conditions for that in the first place. So this is just one example. And then thyroid, like we can spend an hour talking about thyroid, but getting more than just TSH. And looking at more than just a single or 2 different markers. So that's hormone testing. Then you got gut testing, of which there's 3 separate main types. The big gut tests, this is GI map, GIFX, GI360, CDSA. You've got SIBO testing, and you got food sensitivities. And I am less enthusiastic about food sensitivities as a first pass, because if I have if like this is my arm and I poke my arm with my finger and I don't have an open wound here, whatever. But if I have an open wound here and I poke it with my finger, my wound gets irritated. So if I have an intestine, if I have my intestines and I have broccoli, and my broccoli brushes against a healthy intestinal lining, whatever. But if my intestinal lining is irritated, inflamed, got an infection that's upsetting the lining or whatever it is, and broccoli bumps against it, do I have a broccoli allergy? Just the same way, like if my finger touches an open wound and it irritates the wound, do I have a finger allergy? Mm-hmm. No, I have a response to physical irritation, and my body can only defend itself with an immune response and inflammation. But I'd rather heal, seal, and soothe the gut first, then maybe look at food intolerances to see what are actual inborn intolerances, as opposed to just reactive irritations to a sensitive gut. That's my kind of take on food sensitivities. I know that may upset some people listening to it, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, no, well, that makes sense. So we've got you got a couple more.
I got two more and we're done. I got the functional testing. Then I got mitochondria, brain, and liver testing. So this is looking at, and there's also put other blood markers on here like anemia and blood sugar testing. This is looking at your metabolism in mitochondria, fatty acids, amino acids, organic acids, liver detox pathways, heavy metals, certain heavy metals within this profile. Fat soluble vitamins, looking for like the core metabolic markers. Then you get all the weird stuff that you don't want, like mold, metals, and lime, and environmental chemicals you can throw in there as well. So those are the main categories of functional testing, and there's a lot there. It's a lot. Like there's a lot of different companies, there's a lot of different tests, there's sub-tests, what's the order and priority, and this is where working with a trained practitioner is really, really helpful and very efficient, because then they can analyze ideally to a system like the 10 pillars of health or whatever system they got to know what functional tests you actually need and what genetics tests you actually need, as opposed to you just throwing darts and hoping for the best.
So if I understand, we got system of, let's look at the genetic test. Let's get our kind of 7 drivers. Let's try and speak to those, like by the particular diet, by the particular protocol. And if that doesn't work, then let's really dive into the functional piece to understand why what should be working isn't working. And maybe you do it all at once, or maybe you could, if one of the things you mentioned, it's time and money. If maybe you're kind of afraid of the money, then is that
definitely do
kind
genetics
of
first. So if people, here's the way people should triage about it. So ideally, you do all of your genetics. You do your genetics and and your functional tests first go, so you get all the data. You don't, if you depending, if you're doing like the set of genetics tests, you don't need to repeat that because that data is good forever. It doesn't preclude or exclude rather other genetic tests that may have to look at those niche, more downstream things. That's fine, but you want to get the top tier 7 drivers genetics first, and then a slew of all the major functional tests. If you want to just a crisp minimum for functional tests, you want to do a big mitochondria test like the ion panel from Genova. You want to do a big gut test, whether it's like GI map from Diagnostic Solutions Lab. And then you want to do a Dutch test, which will cover the adrenals and sex hormones. And there's a bunch of companies that do thyroid. Mm-hmm. And then some blood tests that will capture like your basic CBC, CMPs, anemia panel, and blood sugar regulation. So that would be kind of the major. And if you have a history that points to, did you have mold, metals, lime, or environmental toxic exposure, then you have to take that into consideration, take that seriously, because you may have that going on. But if people are concerned about financial investment, the single best financial investment you will ever make, there's nothing I've seen that proves otherwise, is those top tier genetics, because the results are permanent and don't decay over time. And what genetics will do is say, this is how you need to ideally live and eat. And there's even specific nutrients that are ideal for certain people that are just permanent fixtures that they need in their diet. And just going forward, like for me, like I need 4 to 6 grams of fish oil a day because I'm a super inflamer. I've got a very high need for some other nutrients because genetically I just have holes in that bucket that I need to keep filling. And you also can identify what your ideal diet is. I mean, can you imagine now the power of knowing, oh, I'm actually a keto/paleo, not a Mediterranean diet. Nothing against the Mediterranean diet people. It's just that I just happen to be over here. Can you imagine how powerful that knowledge is literally for the rest of my life?
Yeah, I think that's amazing. You're talking about not only just the value of understanding where you are, but the fact that that's a permanent test. I know you've got a kind of hard stop here. I want to quickly and let's keep this in about the 1 minute range, which may not be fair. Sure. Age tests. I don't know if you've looked at them. Glycan age, DNA, methylation. You got about a minute, which is probably not fair.
No, it's not. So there's the telomere issue is actually not as clean and clear as it is, because the problem with telomeres is you trade off senescence for repair. And so I'm just going to throw some jargon out there that if you have really long telomeres, you can repair damage, but you're also at risk for more cancer. In fact, the research mice with extra long telomeres, which have been used to test the toxicity of drugs, they've been through a micro, basically evolutionary pressure to have super long telomeres. So they are more resistant to poisoning from, say, pharmaceutical testing than they should have than mice in the wild. And so but these mice all died from cancer.
Yep.
Because if you over repair, that means you repair more than you should. That means you keep more and more cells. We call that cancer.
Yeah.
So this whole thing on telomeres and I know that's not exactly what you asked, but I'm just giving it as an example.
Yeah.
Like, it's not as clear. Evolutionary biology is all about trade-offs, even telomeres.
Yep.
So it's not as clear cut.
How about glycan age? You're familiar with it? Have you looked into it?
It's something that's in my peripheral awareness, so I'm not going to comment on it right now until I get some more education on it.
I'm going to have a glycan age representative on this summit, and also a DNA representative. So I'm pretty excited about kind of digging into those. All right, so I've got a couple of wrap up questions. This has been really phenomenal. This question: what 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts, to longevity and a long health span would you focus on? Maybe you've already covered them. Maybe there's something that you want to share.
So I would say the first mindset is take your health seriously. It is the one investment that you can do that will always give you gains, and that they're guaranteed. Number 2, work with coaches and experts. Don't think that because you listen to 10 podcasts and have, Huberman on auto dial means that you understand everything you need to do. Like, work with people whose careers that are devoted to this, and it will say, like, get educated for sure. Educate yourself, but do work with experts if you can. And the other thing I want to point to is avoid magic bulletism. Avoid chasing shiny holistic object syndrome.
Yep.
Like, this is why testing is the single fastest way for you to individualize what you need in a sustainable long-term way. So you remove the guesswork and you actually aim at longevity instead of hoping the thing you're doing will work.
Makes sense. Next, how can people contact you?
So they can go to my website, just drsamshay.com. I've got some free ebooks there. At the time of this recording, I do take application calls if people want to work with me directly. I also have available genetics testing in both a DIY and a do-it-yourself, as well as an office hours model on a health coaching model for whatever layer of investment people are able to do. So if you want these types of genetic tests, they are available depending on what level of investment you're willing to do, but you will get the information to support you.
Excellent. And what in the near future are you excited about?
My upcoming comedy special I'm writing, finishing up.
That's awesome.
It's focusing on what it's like to have Asperger's. So you mentioned my magnificent brain. I'm going to be putting words in your mouth, but so if people are interested, and you'll see it there on this last slide, bit.ly/Samuel Comedy Clips. That's actually the link to my YouTube channel playlist. And in all seriousness, like if someone just taken 15 to 30 minutes with me 30 years ago and said, "Hey kid, your brain works like this. You have this set of superpowers, this buffet of kryptonites. It's called Asperger's. Here's what you need to do. Here's your spreadsheet that you need to learn all these things to adapt into the normie world. And it's going to take you 30 to 40 years to reach social parity in terms of being able to read people and live amongst the normies. But the good news is your ability to recognize patterns and hyperlearn will continue to go up and up and up. So on the other side of 40, everything looks way better, but those first 30, 40 years are super rough."
Yeah.
And so I'm making that 15 to 30 minutes through comedy to make it palatable, distributing it through social media to make it scalable. So that's what I'm doing. Is I'm very excited about that comedy special. If people want to see the first 10 minutes or so of my Asperger's material, It's the video that says Asperger's Physics and Bears, oh my, which is 18 minute set from the fall of 2022. The first 10 minutes is on Asperger's. So that's what I'm excited about.
I watched some of that. That was really good stuff. All right. So it's Dr. Man, how did I misspell this?
It's
Dr. Sam Shay, right? Dr. Sam Shay.
Yeah.
So it's drsamshay.com. That's his website. I think there are links to the comedy. Also, go check that out. Dr. Shay, thank you so much for joining me. This has been enlightening to me. I don't know if you have time. We may have some conversations after this, but thank you for participating, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.